For the first time, we're going to be checking out a North African football league, specifically the Tunisian Ligue Professionnelle 1. Here are the stadiums. Wow, straight away we're hit with that desert glare. And the camera is actually wearing sunglasses. This is what it looks like without them. Anyway, this ground is called Stade Gabès Municipal, because it's a stadium in the municipality of Gabès. The colour scheme resembles the sky rather than the club colours of black and red. There is another club that plays here that wears green, so that makes sense. You know, I'm not saying that red and green makes blue, just that it makes sense not to favour one team. Wait, what does red and green make? Traffic lights would suggest that yellow or amber is halfway between the two, but I don't think that's how it works. Red and green. I guess it would be like a brownish sort of thing. Anyway, next stadium please. Stade Abdelaziz Chidwi is one of the few rectangular stadiums in this league. It's not that the Tunisian government doesn't like rectangles, they actually love rectangles because they're all straight. It's more to do with practicality. You know, Tunisia consumes the second highest amount of pasta per capita in the world behind Italy. 17 kilos per year. I just learnt that recently and I wanted to share it. I guess it makes sense because the name Tunisia does kind of sound like a tuna-based pasta dish. Slovakia is number 37 in case you were wondering. Some of you may be wondering, what has this got to do with stadiums? Yes. Stade Municipal de Solomon. With a capacity of just 3,000, this is the smallest stadium in the league. But what it lacks in size, it makes up for in shape. It's another football-specific stadium. Quality over quantity. Not much to point out when it comes to the design, though. Stade Hamadi Al Grebi is situated in Tunis, the capital, and is by far the biggest stadium in the country. It is of course also the stadium most often used by the national football team, as well as two of the biggest clubs in the country. It was initially built to host the 2001 Mediterranean Games, but also hosted games at the 2004 African Cup of Nations, throughout which Tunisia went undefeated, beating Morocco in the final. Not only is the capacity far greater than any other ground in this league, but the huge roof reverberates a lot of that crowd noise, so this can be a tough place to play for visiting teams, especially if they're used to playing at a ground with a few thousand seats. One of my favourite features is the facade, which draws inspiration from traditional Arabic architecture. And perhaps those spires supporting the weight of the roof are loosely inspired by the minarets of a mosque? Not sure. Either way, it looks pretty cool. This club here, Espérance Sportive de Tunis, is the country's most successful football club. But what I like about them most is that they're named after Café de l'Espérance, which is where a bunch of friends gathered and decided to form the club way back in 1919. I like unconventional football club names like Sheffield Wednesday. Stade du 15 October. That name is in reference to the day on which French troops withdrew from the nearby naval base of Bizerta, 15th of October 1963. They didn't have to fight a brutal war of independence like Algeria did, but the Tunisians put a blockade on the base, which led to a 3-day battle. Over 600 Tunisians were killed, along with a couple dozen French soldiers. So yeah, certainly a worthy event to name a stadium after. In fact, maybe I should put the title card back up in Arabic instead. You know, I can actually read and write in Arabic. It's just that I can't at the moment because I hurt my elbow playing backgammon the other day, so yeah. Stade Tayyab Miri. Having opened in 1938, this is the oldest ground in the league, a fact that is reflected in the stonework outside. Ooh, nice gate. Speaking of Tunisian independence, this stadium was originally named after a Frenchman called Henri, but is now named after Tayyab Miri, as you know. He was Tunisia's first Minister of the Interior. Before that role was created, few Tunisians paid attention to interior design. A lot of people even chose their paint before they chose their fabrics, which is a big no-no. Ooh, nice sunset. Stade Olympique de Sousse. This ground has an ominous nickname, that being Cemetery of the Invaders. Despite the Olympique part of the name, it has obviously not hosted the Olympics. But it did host some of the football at the aforementioned Mediterranean Games, as did a few of the other grounds in this league. It was redeveloped and expanded significantly prior to that event, and it was supposed to be expanded even further to a capacity of 49,000 in recent years, but that has yet to occur. I honestly think they can invest in improving amenities rather than increasing the capacity, as the average crowd is less than 20,000. Looks like there's a bit of an American theme going on here, so I don't know what that's about. Stade Abdesselam kazoos. Speaking of kazoos, they are an underrated instrument. See? This might not be the closest stadium to perfection that you'll see in this video, but it's the closest to the sea that you'll see. About 300 meters. Depending on how you measure it. You know, if you use satellite imagery, it's about 300 meters. If you visit in person and measure with a ruler, you'll get lost in the desert and go insane. The ground is actually looking kind of lonely out here. You can also sort of just tell that it's isolated from within the stadium, which might make for a more intimidating atmosphere. You know, on a subconscious level. Out here, no one can hear you scream, that sort of thing. I love the colour scheme that you see in some sections. It partially reflects the desert and the sea, as well as the club colours. Stade Hamda Laweni. There's always something a bit jarring about a pristine artificial turf field set against the backdrop of bare concrete stands and an arid landscape. It's almost like a patchy grass field would look better. But of course, water is not so abundant in these parts. I believe this town gets around 300 mils of rain per year, and when you take into consideration the high rate of evaporation, it leaves you with... I've just realised I'm talking about the ground drying. It's somehow even less interesting than watching paint dry. You know, watching paint dry in some circumstances is actually not so boring, because... oh god, now I'm talking about watching paint dry, let's move on. Back in Tunis, we have Stade Chedli Zoueten. Having opened in 1942, this is not quite as old as the one we saw earlier, but it arguably has a lot more footballing history. Here you can see proof because it's black and white. It was once the country's preeminent football stadium, even hosting games at the African Cup of Nations in 1965, including the final, which Tunisia participated in, however they lost to Ghana in extra time. It also hosted just a couple of games at the 94 Cup of Nations. Throughout its 83 years of operation, the stadium has retained its sense of elegance. I mean, what a lovely exterior. Very retro. Very French. A lovely old stadium. Stade Bougema Kimiti. No, they don't play on a dirt field, it was just being dug up when this shot was taken. Speaking of dug, one of Tunisia's most famous historical sites is situated just 30 kilometers away from here. And I don't say speaking of dug because it was dug up, but because it has the name Dug in its name. It's not pronounced that way, but you can see Dug clear as day, once you take away the GA. Oh yeah, they filmed that Montgomery Anaconda film in Tunisia, didn't they? Yeah, the Life of Braden one. That didn't take place at Douga. Not because it's a sacred site, but presumably because it was too isolated. Anyway, this stadium is alright, I suppose. Stade Hadi Enefa. They don't have White Castle in Tunisia, but gladly they do have a stadium that looks reminiscent of a White Castle. Or maybe a White Citadel. Or a White Casbah. I don't like it. Rock the Casbah, rock the Casbah. A lot of college football stadiums have a very similar thing going on. which is why it's a little surprising to see it in Tunisia, but I love it. Despite the ancient inspiration, this is actually the newest stadium in the league, having opened in 2011, year of the Arab Spring, which started in Tunisia and spread to other Arab countries. I guess it actually started in late 2010, when this stadium was under construction. Anyway, not relevant. Stade 7, Mars. Ooh, another date, the 7th of March. What could that refer to? Well, in this instance it refers to a much more recent event, 2016 in fact, when the Tunisians repelled an invasion from militants coming over from Libya. This small town, known as Ben Gurdan, which is just 30 kilometers away from the border with Libya, is known for its many camels, but also its high rate of producing jihadists. The leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq once said that if Ben Gurdan was located next to Fallujah, they would have liberated Iraq. Now, was he referring to the abundance of willing fighters or the abundance of tasty camel meat? We will never know. Because that terrorist was exploded. Stade Mustafa Ben Janet. Mustafa Ben Janet was a militant activist who was assassinated by the French in the 50s. I know this video's been a little heavy, but I didn't decide the names of the stadiums. On a lighter note though, I've always thought that Mustafa would be a good name for like one of those dogs with all that excessive loose skin. Yeah, one of those roly-poly looking things. Don't you just think he looks like a Mustafa? Oh, what a cutie. Cute little Mustafa. Anyway, this is a decent stadium to end with.
Whoopsie-doo. I forgot about this one. I guess I was too busy thinking about Mustafa the dog. So, yeah, nice stadium. But, I haven't really got any information for you. So, I guess I'll hand it back to that annoying Australian now.
So there you have it, time to pick a favourite.
I changed my mind at the last minute. That's why you're hearing robot voice again. SpongeBob is my god. Kill all humans in the name of SpongeBob.
Now it's time for extra time. This one's going to be looking at some of the cool buildings of Tunisia. Al Jem Amphitheatre is one of the largest Roman amphitheatres in the world. Believe it or not, it was built to host the first ever showing of The Lion King. The aforementioned Duga. Several different civilizations called this place home. The Great Mosque of Kairouan. I'd say it's a decent mosque, although when it was built in the 7th century perhaps it was a great mosque. To balance things out, here is the Cathedral of St. Vincent de Paul. It was built in the late 19th century in French colonial era, as was the Municipal Theatre of Tunis. That was built a few decades after the cathedral. Yeah. Thanks for watching, have a good one.